Welcome to First is Everything, a brand new series from New York Festivals dedicated to First in Automotive. Hey everybody, welcome to First is Everything. I'm Joe Reynoso, Creative Director at Innocean USA, and today we're talking to Jason Sperling, our brand new CCO. Thanks for joining us today. Looking forward to having a little conversation with you. But before we dive into First in Auto and advertising, I'd love to just go all the way back to the very beginning of Jason pre-advertising.
I really didn't understand that commercial creativity was a thing. It just so happened that one summer I was looking for a job, and there was an opportunity at this place called the LA Business Journal. It was like a business, business paper, and they were looking for a creative intern. I took it, kind of opened my eyes to the fact that, I was making small space ads for different law firms and whatever, but I was like, there's an actual world of people who are doing commercial creativity. That, along with the fact that I quickly realized through a show called 30 Something that, oh my God, there's this whole world of advertising that they weren't teaching necessarily in college. Yeah. And so I went to art school. I had a teacher who quickly identified that my art direction sucked and said, you really should focus on copy. I had a teacher that lit some of my work on fire, who I think literally lit it on fire because he didn't want me to return to that idea, nor did he think it was very good. They were really trying to show hey, this is what the real world is about. It's gonna be hard. You're going to have a lot of strong opinions, and you better get used to it. I think that might have been an antiquated look at this. Not necessarily an evolved perspective of how you get the best out of people, but I did run into people like that, and I wouldn't say that I needed that training, but it was it was eye-opening. And I didn't necessarily. I was very. I really was. When you're in school and you're going through all of the award show annuals and all the places that are making great work, you're like, oh, I would love to be there. That would be great. I didn't necessarily have the portfolio coming out of school, which then translates into smaller jobs. And the feeling that, oh my God, I'm never going to work at one of those places that's doing all that incredible work. And so you're sort of on the outside looking in, and I spent a good amount of years doing that. It so happened while I was at a place in LA working on, some good creative opportunities, but still very local market. I went into an informational interview at Chiat Day. With a guy that he didn't really know me. It was all through a mutual friend. And that might've been why he didn't show up to our informational interview. But it did teach me, be nice to people around you, be nice in this industry, because it really, not only it being the right thing to do, it can pay dividends later. And I ran into someone I had worked with in the past who was then working on Apple. And she said, without knowing that I was there for just an informational interview, before you take that job with that group, you really should meet the Apple group who's here as well.
Wow.
So that turned into interviews. Don't think they necessarily had big plans for me, given the fact that I remember the managing director took me into an unlit, basically a broom closet. And, in the sort of he didn't shut the door, so it wasn't dark. It wasn't weird like that. But it was I could tell he was just comes in and he goes, how do you feel about writing body copy? And you're thinking of Apple and you're like, I'm here, I'm going to write, these big anthemic, think different, here's to the crazy ones, 1984. And he's like, what do you think of body copy? Basically telling me you're going to be
you're gonna be over here.
You're gonna be the janitor.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'll write the best damn body copy you've ever seen. Meanwhile, there was another guy who was coming in around the same level, who they had flown in from Wyden, Shanghai, put him up for the weekend with his girlfriend, took him out for dinner, drinks, wine, dined. We'd love for you to work here. I was body copy guy.
Wow.
But then about 2 months later, the brief for rebranding the new Mac comes to me, along with twin babies, which made 3 for me. And about, timing's really hard, but 4 to 6 months later, we arrive at Mac versus PC. Was definitely not an easy one to birth. But that sort of changed the entire trajectory of my career.
Hello, I'm a Mac.
Hello, I'm a PC.
We have a lot in common these days.
We both run Microsoft Office. We share files. It's great. We just get along.
PC. Oh. Okay.
Hi, I'm a PC.
Okay, we're past that. We moved beyond that.
Yeah, I had to restart there. You know how it is.
No, actually, I don't.
Oh, what? Macs don't have to.
We had him, then we lost him. I'm gonna go get IT. Keep an eye on him.
For me, it was like a moment to, while I still felt like a bit of an interloper, like, oh, there's all these people, so pedigree, they've worked here and here and here. It gave me just a feeling that I could hold my own with all these folks, even though I didn't sort of, come from all that or had the backgrounds that they had. But I turned it into, at least I think I did, once that campaign had run, once I had touched iPhone and iPad, what was always going through my mind was like, that can't be, you're not a one-hit wonder. This can't be the career highlight. And so when I ended up moving to a place called RPA and working, basically heading up the Honda group, I wanted to reinforce, my ability and level of creativity, level of craft that I thought I was capable of.
So early in your career, you were met with this like intense situations of basically kind of animosity towards the industry, right? Like a professor burning a project and going to the broom closet and talking about body copy. Like what kept you going through those scenarios?
A lot of people I think are motivated by wanting to do amazing things. I am motivated by the fear of not doing amazing things. I think a lot of the drive came from I can't screw this up. I want to prove to myself, to my peers, to my parents that I could be amazing. The personalities, at some point became sort of normalized. And I mean, not normalized in terms of hey, this is normal behavior I could do, but just endemic of the career and some of the people in it. Mind you, there were some really gentle souls and really brilliant people who didn't necessarily need to manifest that other sort of I'm gonna motivate you through fear of your job or failure. But I will say that the 2 years spent in grad school were not relaxed and I would call fun. They were filled with self-doubt and anxiety and will I succeed? I remember a recruiter who I love to death now, but she came to the school and she's I think it was, I don't remember the exact term, but it was only 10% of you are going to make it in this career and a small percent of you are going to make it in this particular area, San Francisco. And I was just oh my God, I have to be that 10%, I have to push myself. I remember there was a week, I was taking a really challenging course and I really wanted to make this professor proud. And there were really, I was there for grad school. So, I was there with a lot of people who were adults and thinking about their careers. And I already spent, actually 5 years in undergrad. I realized I had to have direction. And they were all very talented. We were challenging each other. And I remember I'd come up with one really smart ad. And we had to do a campaign. And I remember it was right before spring break. So my job over spring break was to figure out what the extensions of what the campaign were. And I would sit there all day, like hours just looking at a paper and like scratching out every single idea I had because they were not good. And I remember going back to the teacher after the break and like just agonizing, you know. I'd let him down, I'd let myself down. I was looking silly in front of the class and I hadn't solved it. And he's like, man, if you're not getting it in 20 minutes, walk away. Like you're compounding it by trying to force a moment of creativity. So I guess I'm sort of walking away from the question, but I think it was like, you know, those difficult personalities, you know, they're always going to be there in some fashion. I will say that as I moved up, I've really enjoyed probably my job more so because I don't have to necessarily be at the mercy of those things that either made me feel bad about myself or made me more anxious or fearful of my job. I much would prefer like being in control of my destiny versus did I make my boss happy? Did I get the affirmation? Like, you know, it's different. And so I've always been very aware of myself and how I'm making other people feel, trying to get the best out of them, but also realizing that every word that comes out of my mouth counts and is going to affect them in more ways than I even know.
You have to be so vulnerable when you're creative.
Exactly.
Like you put yourself on the line, right?
Right.
Like your ideas, your thinking is judged as soon as it leaves your mouth.
And it's kind of you being judged.
And it's you being judged. Yeah. Exactly. So things become personal and you take it in, you're like, internalize it. And so there's like a battle, right? That you have to go through. To get to the other side of it. To produce.
You're so right. And all these places that would motivate you through fear of your job or like pitch you against others in a way that was like, I'm judging you. And I always felt like, look, creatives have enough anxiety and fear just innately, you know, it's sort of built into who we are. You don't need to add to it. And that's why, you know, when I've looked at, you know, hiring people, what I really try and what I really sort of look for is how do I find people who are just innately creative, who are like, if they're not making something, it's tearing them up inside. Mm-hmm. If they're not doing something that's making them proud or fulfilled, like they have to go find it elsewhere, you know? So when I look at books, I'm looking for like, what have you done outside of just ads, you know, that just shows like, I am just making, I just have to let it out of myself. Because those are the people that ultimately you can just stand back and maybe direct a little bit, but you're not pushing.
Yeah, just let them go.
I don't want to push. Like that's the worst thing in the world when you have to push someone or, you know, because it's, you understand the effect you're having on their life or their person.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, you've grew up working on Apple, I'd say, like in that sort of scenario, which is really intense, like constantly churning,
the most,
learning, and like so creating stuff out of that, and then moving into a new position. So going from like tech to automotive in a leadership position, was there like a big change in that mindset that sort of became a part of your leadership style? Or
I feel like, well, yes. I mean, one of the reasons I left Apple, the rigor was amazing, and it's unlike anything else out there. It is an absolute grind that, you know, I would say for a lot of people, it isn't the end all be all, although, you know, that brand keeps you there because it's so hard. There was, you know, it became very normal for people to come into my office and cry about, you know, whatever it is, their life crumbling because they were working all the time or just feeling so defeated or whatever it was. I mean, it was an every week, every weekend, always on, you know, constant pivots where it was just like, all right, you think you're at the finish line? Come on back to the agency. You know, Steve hates it all. And that was just a normal thing. But I think that one of the things that has really helped is this ability to get through this sort of trial by fire, being thrown, to the wolves in a sort of way where, after Mac and PC was well on its way and we were now working on iPad, when someone comes up to you and says, your day job is Mac, your night job is iPad, that becomes this trial by fire where you just have to jump in and do it. When I shifted over to cars, and primarily, there were a lot of reasons I left and went to a place like RPA, but what I didn't anticipate was that about a month in, the CCO there took a leave of absence. And it was kind of an overnight thing where it was kind of weird because he had said, when I took the job, he was like, I want you to reinvent this brand, or I want you to really help hone it and dial it in ways that we're not comfortable with, And then every time I kept showing that work, it was always met with like, ooh, that's not really Honda.
Yeah.
So this one day, I wrote a note and I said, hey, I don't think I'm not really happy with this arrangement. You're probably not happy with me. Why don't we get together tomorrow and talk about this? I was waiting for a response. So that whole night I'm like, sort of
Put yourself out, you're freaking out.
yeah. I'm like just perseverating. Like, where is, I think I'm fired. And then I go in the next day, he's not there. And he's like, I hear that he's just taken this leave of absence for whatever reasons. I felt horrible, but at the same time it was like, all right, well, shoot, now I've got to do this. Never worked on cars, don't know the difference between regional, national, these levels of management, the sort of,
scale of
automotive and the scale of the teams. And truth be told, it was like my Mac team was like, there were 6 of us, And so there was an intimacy. I went in there and probably positioned myself as like, I broad, lots of teams, lots of cross-functional partners. Here I was, like, it was just a fake it till you make it moment. And I had, a gigantic team. I was like 75, 80 people. So I was sort of thrust into that moment. And that was just a massive trial by fire. When I went to Meta and took a job on the client side, just running Oculus VR, the CCO 3 weeks into my tenure there said, hey, how would you like to run the entire division? So it went from just VR to VR, AR, Metaverse, Meta for Work, Portal, which was our video chatting device. It was global. It was EMEA, APAC. It was every media channel you could ask for. There were, I think, at one point 12 agencies to manage. It was like, again, just a trial by fire. Like, you know what? The worst thing that can happen is I can fail, but I really don't want to fail.
No, you can't. Not an option.
Yeah.
So you went automotive. So you're tech, automotive.
To tech. To automotive.
And now you're back to automotive.
Yeah.
With 3 brands.
Sure.
And different dynamics and all kinds of things. Are there like similarities that you found between managing all of, Oculus and all of Meta and all of Reality Labs to the diversity of what you've just stepped into?
There's a familiarity in terms of having oversight over, disparate brands. That are their own silos, where you're sort of in a bit of a polygamous relationship where, you really have to give every bit of yourself to a lot of different CMOs and brand managers and teams. So that was really good, teaching there. I love the automotive world in just the sense of you tend to get really genuine people. I mean, they have lots of personalities, but they're very genuine. They're very, I would say, upfront and tell it like it is. I really appreciate that just the openness and honesty. It's a little different in tech. It's a little different beast. It is harder to navigate. And maybe it's because I'm sort of on the other side, but it is a way more political beast. I really enjoy the automotive space, and honestly, my 10 years at RPA, I do say are like some of, where I truly fell in love with marketing and both sides of it. Like I loved my group, I loved the agency. I also loved all my clients and the way that they were open and available like I had never seen. I used to do a walk with the CMO, and I still call a lot of them friends. I go to Mammoth with my family, and one of them is retired there, and I go say hi to him and have drinks. He's one of the ex-presidents on Honda. I've got an open pickleball invitation from another retired.
You're gonna get into pickleball?
Yeah. But no, it's really good, and that's honestly at the end of the day, given the fact that so much of what we do is like a lot of exploration and like, disappointment and frustration.
Yeah.
If you're not doing it with and for the right people, it's just not as fulfilling. But when you are, it's like you put everything into it. And that's the thing too, is like leaders, it's like the ones that treat you with respect and are approachable and kind and invested in you, those are the ones that you'll throw yourself at a wall for.
Yeah.
And so like all those early personalities that I dealt with, and maybe some of it was just like, hey, you got to stand out to sort of get recognized in the industry. But like, were people throwing themselves at walls for those people? Like,
probably not.
Probably not.
Yeah.
Anyway, all the things you pick up along the way.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing. So what is it about automotive though that like gets you excited? Is it the types of briefs? Is it the diversity of the media? Is it like, what is it about it that like lights the fire?
Well, I think first of all, I wouldn't say that I'm just in love with automotive. What I do love is I love a brand that's at an inflection point. And I think Hyundai is, and Genesis and Kia are at this amazing inflection point where there's this shift happening, very innovative shift, obviously in electrification, but like they're democratizing it, they're pushing things ahead further than sort of, faster and further, I think, than a lot of competitors. And so that's really attractive to be a part of that story. So I almost like when I came from tech to cars, I really do believe that there's a halo of tech and innovation that makes this a really attractive brand moving forward, suite of brands. The other thing I love is having the entirety of that brand to work with. It was really wonderful when I worked at RPA until, there was some folks who started to peel back some of the pieces of really having ownership of the whole narrative and being able to, being able to really figure out every piece of communication, how that furthers the story, and not necessarily just being given a brief. One of the things that is interesting, compelling, and also a huge responsibility is that when you have that insight into the entirety of the brand, you know every problem. And that means going above and beyond sort of what's being asked. So I know what's keeping all the CMOs up at night.
Yeah.
I know some of the issues, that the brand has to deal with. I also know the opportunities. And so that ability to sort of add value to both product and marketing is like a siren's call. It's like that's the thing you want to do. I never want to go back to just dealing with, here's your brief, this other agency's getting a brief.
Only TV.
Only
Nothing
TV.
else.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Only this launch. Maybe you'll get another little piece. To me, you're not developing a brand, you're just making creative. I think there's real power in sort of setting all the pieces in place and seeing what happens when you do it, seeing what happens when you do it right. Is awesome.
Especially when each one of them line up and they are all pointed at the one goal.
Oh yeah. There was like a 2-year period when I was working on Honda where it was just between retail and brand and social and values driven, work. Like all of it was just like gelling, and it felt great, and you could see it like our clients, were just like, suddenly they were, doing all these talks in all these places and felt the stardom of like being a brand leader. And you could see it, in retail, the sales were doing really well. And, there wasn't the whole like, oh, the chairman's coming, what do I do? It was like, the chairman's coming and they're gonna have good things to say. And there's nothing better than seeing that. And just feeling too, like great work begets great talent, begets great talent that wants to stay. It doesn't want to go anywhere. People start to feel like they can unlock more and more big ideas. Like it's phenomenal.
Kind of a system that feeds itself.
It does. It absolutely does in so many ways.
Man, it's been inspiring, like listening to you talk about like how just everything can kind of work together and be synced and be open and friendly and open to new ideas and approachable. The paths to the creativity and figuring out how to make great work. I appreciate the time.
I appreciate you listening, Jeff. Thank you.
Thanks.